What's up guys, this is Kephas, and today we are going to take a look at Vintage Demon Hunters and the macro I've made for GnomeSequencer Enhanced 2.0. So I've assumed that you've downloaded that mod, GnomeSequencer Enhanced 2.0, you checked out my video for it and the macros that I've created, and you have imported the Vintage Demon Hunter macro. If you haven't done any of those things, you can check out the description below where there will be links explaining all of that. Otherwise, let's get into it. So Vengeance Demon Hunters are tanks. If you're going to use these macros, keep that in mind. These are made with the intent to perform as best as possible as I can get them to, but it's important that you do your role and do your job as a tank. So keep that in mind. Otherwise, let's get into this. Vengeance Demon Hunter is really just about as simple as a Havoc Demon Hunter, if not even simpler, because it's just a bunch of cooldowns more or less. So there's this macro for single target and AoE. It will work for both because the rotation doesn't change that much, and if you look here you will see simply a bunch of cooldown abilities. Target enemy no harm dead as always. Cast Shear. The way this is designed to work, you want to use Shear as basically a filler, more or less. And I've got Inner Loop set to 2. That means it's going to go through all these twice before it'll use Shear again. And if you're spamming it fast enough, that's not going to be a big deal, because basically what it's going to try to do is make sure that you're hitting these abilities more often and not hitting this too much so that you're not getting these abilities on cooldown. So it's going to work just fine, but that's basically how it's designed. And if you look down here at the bottom, I have put Demon Spikes in the macro, mainly because of a talent choice that I've made. If you want to manage Demon Spikes separately as a mitigation ability, you feel free to do so. Simply just remove it from the macro. Select it, delete it, save the macro. Simple as that. Otherwise, the macro is going to do Fell Blade if you've taken that talent, Soul Carver on cooldown, Fell Devastation on cooldown if you've taken that talent, Immolation Aura on cooldown, Fell Eruption on cooldown, Soul Cleave on cooldown, and Throw Glaive on cooldown. Throw Glaive is kind of a taunt, so if you don't want that in the macro, you can remove it. Otherwise, I just put it in to make things that much easier. It's entirely up to you. Do whatever you want. The macro is going to handle all of those abilities, keeping them on cooldown, and it's also going to do Shear as it's available, making sure that all these other abilities are on cooldown first, as they are the priority. That's the macro, you guys. It's really that simple. There really isn't too much to explain, just like the other Demon Hunter macro that I made for Havoc. Now, as you guys know, I don't usually specify this because I feel like it's kind of obvious. You do have sigils, and you need to keep that in mind as well. So you've got, this is like a Sigil of Flame. Hang on, sorry, malfunction. Since it has a big AoE reticle like this, you're going to want to cast or manage that separately. So keep that in mind. You are going to have to manage that one on your own. Same goes for Metamorphosis, and same goes for this one, the Leap one. I can't think of what it's called. Infernal Strike. There it is. For goodness sakes, I got it. We figured it out. Otherwise, let's take a look at the talents. Now, there are other sigils as well. Make sure that you're managing those separately. It's just, you know, like I said, if it's got an AoE reticle, you're going to have to manage it separately as always. So, the first tier, I recommend Razor Spikes. It will put a DPS buff on Demon Spikes. It's really cool. It makes it so that I can use this ability freely, using it as often as possible. 6-second usage, 14-second cooldown, which means there's 8 seconds where it's not being used, but I just use it as much as possible. Makes it a little bit easier that way. Should be fine. If you don't feel comfortable with that, you can always remove Demon Spikes from the macro, and you can manage it separately if you want to. These are the talents. Should be fine. Infernal Strike's range is increased by 10 yards, and its cooldown is reduced by 8 seconds. This will make it so that you're going to want to use Infernal Strikes more often. It's nice. It's a really good option. It synergizes well with some other talents, but I'm going with a different build because it's simpler. So just keep that in mind. Next up is Feast of Souls. Soul Cleave heals you for an additional a lot of healing. So that's a good one. I recommend this one because the healing is nice. We're going to use Soul Cleave on cooldown, or as much as possible with our generation. So that's one. Fell Blade I recommend because it's great. It's going to be in the macro. You could always go with Fell Eruption if you want to. If you don't want to use Fell Blade, that is also in the macro. It's entirely up to you. Feed the Demon. Consuming a soul fragment reduces the remaining cooldown of Demon Spikes by 1 second. Now, again, since we're using Demon Spikes on cooldown, this is a great option if you're keeping up on consuming those soul fragments. So, that's awesome. Fracture. Now, this is one that you could go with. It's not in the macro, mainly because I want to make it easier. We don't want to consume pain with more than one ability. If we use Fracture, then the macro is going to spam Fracture whenever there's 20 pain, and we want to try to make sure that we're using Soul Cleave instead. So I felt like it was easier to go with Feed the Demon, reducing the Demon Spikes cooldown so we can use it more often. This just makes the macro a lot easier by not going with Fracture. If you do go with Fracture though, just keep in mind how the macro works and make sure that you're using this ability separately. So again, keep that in mind. And then of course you could gain 50% leech while Metamorphosis is active if you want to. It's entirely up to you, but you're only going to get that every 3 minutes. So, it's up to you. But I personally like the Feed the Demon one, especially with my macro and how I use it. So, Fell Devastation is in the macro. It's a minute cooldown. It's as simple as that. I like it. You'll have 30 pain long before you have enough to use Soul Cleave or whatever, so that's fine. You can go with this one. Parrying an attack increases the pain generation of your next shear by 70%. It's an option if you want. It's not going to change the macro. And then Spirit Bomb, you can go with that one if you want to, but you're going to have to manage it separately just because of how it works. And then last, of course, we've got Last Resort. Sustaining fatal damage increases, or instead transforms you into Metamorphosis form and returns you to 30% health. This effect only occur every 8 minutes. So it's a really good option for encounters because it's going to give you a second chance, puts you in demon form, which is nice. So I mean, it's not going to change how your macro works. So you can go with that one. Demonic Infusion you could go with if you want to. You're going to have to manage it though, so it's just with the way it generates a bunch of pain and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to waste it. It's a 2-minute cooldown, so it's all up to you. And then Shadow Barrier, kind of the same thing. It's kind of it gives you kind of mitigation abilities. So I kind of went with the more simple route. It's up to you what you want to do, but you're going to have to manage that kind of stuff separately. Otherwise, as you can see here, the macro works pretty simply. We're going to jump in there and go at it. And as you can see here, it's dropping out these sigils. What I should be doing now is making sure that I cast Sigil of Flame, so it's doing that as much as possible. Otherwise, it's going to use my abilities. It's going to use Shear. It's going to use Throw Glaive. It's going to build up, and it's going to cast those abilities when they become available. So you can always, go into Metamorphosis mode if you want to, transform yourself, use that effectively, and it's definitely spending the Fury, or I always call it Fury because I get confused between. See, I'm not used to playing Vengeance, so it's kind of confusing for me because I'm really used to playing Havoc, but it seems to be working out pretty well. I'm pretty happy with it. DPS-wise, we're doing 86k. Of course, it's a tank, so of course the DPS isn't like really going to be all that outstanding. But yeah, you will have to manage your other abilities, any kind of mitigation abilities you have, any kind of long periodic cooldowns you're going to want to use separately. But these short ones, like Demon Spikes, we can absolutely include in the macro. Now, of course, I haven't tanked with this very much, so I don't know if it's like performing extensively well. But I feel pretty good about the smoothness of it, how it's working. It seems to be working okay. It seems to be keeping all those abilities on cooldown, which is what you want. And it seems to be using everything just fine. So feel free to modify it and remove abilities that you don't want it to manage. And yeah, otherwise, just keep in mind, as always, you are going to want to make sure that any kind of AoE reticle abilities, like your sigils, you're going to want to use separately. So keep that in mind, you guys. Otherwise, the macro is going to work just fine. So I hope this video was helpful for you. Sorry for my stumbling of words. You get confused with Havoc Demon Hunters because I play those so much. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for your continued support. If you have any questions or if you have any bugs to report, by all means, feel free to do so, and I will be sure to fix those as soon as possible. Otherwise, thank you guys for watching. Have a wonderful day. This is Kephas. Until next time.